My name is Aurelia Thorne. For the longest time, my world felt small and quiet, contained within the four walls of the apartment I shared with Julian and the gentle, ordered world of my illustrations. I'm an artist, or at least, that's what I call myself on the rare occasions I have to fill out a form. Mostly, I draw for myself, creating whimsical worlds on paper that feel more real to me than the brick and mortar of the city of Silverwood. I'm 30 years old, and for the past 5 years, my life has been orbiting Julian Croft, a man I believed was my sun, my moon, and all my stars. Our story began not with a thunderclap, but with a quiet drizzle, much like Silverwood itself. He was an architect, a shaper of skylines, and he walked into the small gallery where my work was first displayed with an air of quiet authority. He didn't just look at my drawings of fantastical cities and forgotten forests, he saw them. He spoke of line weight and perspective, of the narrative embedded in the architecture of my imagined worlds. He saw me, and I, a woman who had spent most of her life feeling invisible, fell completely and irrevocably in love. Julian was magnetic. Not in a loud, bombastic way, but with a deep, gravitational pull. He was 10 years my senior, established and respected, with a mind that moved in clean, logical lines, a stark contrast to my own dreamy, wandering thoughts. He made me feel anchored. His world of blueprints, steel, and glass was so solid, so real. He lived in a minimalist loft in the restored warehouse district, a place of polished concrete floors, exposed brick, and a view that swallowed the entire city skyline. It was his space, a testament to his success, and soon, it became my home too. I moved in 6 months after we met. My own small apartment, with its paint-splattered floors and north-facing window, was sublet and then forgotten. I brought my drawing table, my books, and my hopes, fitting them into the clean, empty spaces of his life. I cooked for him, learning to create dishes as elegant and refined as his taste. I organized his home, transforming it into a sanctuary he could return to after long days of shaping the city. I became the curator of his private life, a role I took on with a quiet, devoted pride. We talked of the future in soft, abstract terms. He'd often speak of when we have a real house, a place in the hills overlooking the city, a place he would design for us. He gave me a ring 2 years into our relationship. It wasn't an engagement ring, he'd explained carefully, but a promise. It was a beautiful, unconventional piece, a thin band of hammered white gold with a single, uncut sapphire, dark as a midnight sky. He'd told me a story about finding it in a small antique shop in Europe, a story that felt as magical as one of my own drawings. I wore it on my right hand, a constant, tangible reminder of our promised future. But the future never seemed to arrive. Whenever I tried to gently nudge the conversation toward a more concrete timeline, toward marriage, Julian would grow distant. All in good time, Aurelia, he'd say, his voice smooth and placating. We don't need a piece of paper to validate what we have. Our life is perfect as it is. He would accuse me, gently, of being insecure, of needing old-fashioned traditions that were beneath us. And I, eager to be the cool, understanding partner he deserved, would retreat, tucking my desires away like a childish secret. My friends, particularly my best friend Clara, saw things more clearly. Clara was a force of nature, a landscape photographer who saw the world in sharp, unfiltered light. You're living his life, Aurelia, she'd tell me over coffee in her chaotic, plant-filled studio. When was the last time he stepped into your world? When did he last come to one of your small gallery shows? When did he ever do something just for you? I would defend him, of course. I'd speak of his demanding career, of the quiet ways he showed his love, the way he'd trace the line of my spine as we fell asleep, the way he'd leave articles on my desk about artists he thought I'd admire. I believed in the narrative I had constructed, that our love was a quiet, profound thing, too deep for grand gestures. I chose to see the gaps in our life not as absences, but as spaces waiting to be filled with the future he kept promising. I was patient. I was understanding. I was a fool. The discovery that shattered my carefully constructed world happened on a quiet Tuesday morning. The air was thick with the promise of rain, the sky a soft, pearly grey. Julian had left early for a site visit, a last-minute trip to the coast to inspect a new luxury development. He'd be gone for 3 days, he'd said, kissing my forehead with a familiar, distracted affection. The loft was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator and the distant sigh of traffic. It was in these quiet moments, when the space was all mine, that I felt a particular kind of peace. I was in his office, a room I rarely entered. It was his sanctuary, a place of sharp lines and organized thoughts. I was only there to find a book on architectural history he'd mentioned, thinking it might inspire a new series of drawings. His desk was immaculate, as always. But on the floor, tucked beside a stack of architectural journals, was a small, polished cedar box. It was a beautiful object, intricately carved, and I didn't recognize it. Curiosity, a gentle, harmless tug, made me pick it up. I assumed it was a gift for a client, or perhaps something for his mother. The lid lifted with a soft, satisfying click. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark blue velvet, was a wedding invitation. The cardstock was thick and creamy, the color of ivory. The lettering was not printed, but exquisitely calligraphed in gold leaf, shimmering in the soft morning light. The script was elegant, flowing, and utterly foreign. And the names. The names made the world stop turning. Julian Alastair Croft and Seraphina Dubois. Request the honor of your presence at their marriage. Saturday, the 21st of September. The Silverwood Conservatory and Botanical Gardens. My breath caught in my throat. I read the names again, and then a third time, my mind refusing to assemble the words into a coherent thought. It was a mistake. It had to be. A misprint. A different Julian Croft. But there was no mistake. And the date. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and numb. The 21st of September. That was this coming Saturday. 4 days from now. The blood drained from my face, a cold tide pulling all the warmth and life from my body. 4 days. 5 years of my life, of my love, of my devotion, and he was marrying someone else in 4 days. A tidal wave of questions crashed over me. Who was Seraphina Dubois? How long had this been happening? Were those late nights at the office, those frequent business trips, all a lie? Had any of it been real? Beneath the invitation was another velvet partition. My hand trembled as I lifted it. There, in a custom-fitted recess, lay a platinum engagement ring. It was a classic solitaire, the diamond so large and brilliant it seemed to steal all the light in the room. It was the kind of ring a man like Julian would give to the woman he was actually going to marry. A ring for the real world, not a whimsical, antique promise for a fantasy. The cedar box slipped from my fingers, clattering onto the polished concrete floor. The sound was unnervingly loud in the silent loft. I sank into Julian's expensive leather chair, the beautiful, cruel invitation clutched in my hand. The quiet life I had so carefully tended, the future I had so patiently waited for, was an illusion. And the man I loved, the man whose life I had made my own, was a complete and utter stranger. The first call I made was to Clara. I couldn't form a complete sentence, just choked sobs and broken phrases. The box. An invitation. He's getting married, Clara. She was there in 20 minutes, her car screeching to a halt in the loading zone downstairs. She found me on the floor of Julian's office, the invitation and the diamond ring laid out before me like evidence at a crime scene. She didn't say, "I told you so," though the thought was surely screaming in her mind. Instead, she knelt beside me, wrapped her strong arms around my shaking shoulders, and just held me. "That absolute monster," she whispered into my hair, her voice tight with a rage that I was too shattered to feel. "That duplicitous, cowardly snake." "I don't understand," I cried, the words tearing at my raw throat. 5 years. How could he do this for 5 years? "Because men like him are good at it," she said, her tone hardening. "They build compartments. You were in one, she was in another. He probably convinced himself he was doing nothing wrong." Over the next few hours, fueled by Clara's fury and a pot of brutally strong coffee, the shock began to recede, replaced by a deep, hollow ache. We pieced things together. Serafina Dubois. A quick search online revealed everything. She was the daughter of Dr. Alistair Dubois, the esteemed dean of Silverwood University's Architecture School. She was a recent law school graduate, philanthropic, beautiful, and from a world of academic and social prestige that I had only ever glimpsed from the outside. Her social media was private, but the university's alumni page had a glowing feature on her engagement to the brilliant up-and-coming architect, Julian Croft. The article was 6 months old. He had been engaged to her for at least 6 months, all while sleeping next to me, all while letting me plan my days and my future around him. The realization was a physical blow. The quiet dinners, the shared laughter, the whispered "I love yous" in the dark, all of it had been a lie, a performance. He hadn't just deceived me, he had erased me. To his real world, I didn't exist. "What did he say when you called him?" Clara asked, her voice gentle. "I haven't," I whispered. "He's on the coast. He thinks I'm here, watering his plants and waiting for him to come home." "What are you going to do, Aurelia?" The question hung in the air of the beautiful, minimalist loft that had never truly been my home. I looked at my reflection in the vast wall of Windhouse, a pale, tear-streaked woman surrounded by a life that wasn't hers. I could pack my things and disappear. I could leave him a note, a final, quiet exit. That would be the Aurelia he knew, the one who never made a fuss, who always understood. But as I looked at the golden calligraphy on that invitation, something new and unfamiliar began to smolder in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't rage, not yet. It was a cold, quiet sense of injustice. He had stolen 5 years of my life. He had made me feel small and insecure for wanting the very thing he was giving to someone else. He was not going to get away with it. He was not going to erase me. "I don't know what I'm going to do," I said, my voice gaining a sliver of strength. "But I am not leaving quietly." When Julian returned 2 days later, the loft was exactly as he had left it. I had carefully placed the cedar box back where I found it. I greeted him with a kiss, a gesture that felt like swallowing shards of glass. I made his favorite dinner, chicken roasted with lemon and thyme. We ate in near silence, the space between us charged with everything I knew and everything he was hiding. I watched him, searching his face for any flicker of guilt, any sign of the double life he was leading. There was nothing. He was calm, affectionate, and completely convincing. He was a masterful architect of lies. That night, as he slept beside me, his breathing deep and even, I felt a profound sense of detachment. I was sleeping next to a stranger. This man, whose every contour and habit I knew, was a phantom. The love I had felt for him had curdled into something I couldn't name, a mixture of grief, disgust, and a terrifying, nascent resolve. The next day, Friday, The day before his wedding, I told him I was going to visit my aunt a few hours out of the city for the weekend. "Oh," he said, a flicker of something relief in his eyes. "That's nice. Say hello for me." "I will," I said, my voice steady. "I'll be back Sunday evening." "Perfect," he said, kissing me goodbye. "I'll miss you." As I walked out of the loft, carrying a small overnight bag filled with nothing of importance, I knew I would never be back. The key to his perfect life felt heavy in my pocket. I dropped it into a mailbox on the corner, the soft thud of metal on metal, a quiet, final sound. My plan began to form, not as a detailed blueprint, but as a series of emotional necessities. First, I needed to see him, to confront him, but not alone in the quiet of the loft where he held all the power. I needed to do it on my own terms. Second, and this felt surprisingly important, I needed to tell her. This Serafina Dubois, this woman who was about to marry a ghost, deserved to know the truth. It wasn't about hurting her. It was about honoring the reality of my own life, and perhaps saving a piece of hers. Clara was my rock. She helped me find a dress, a simple, elegant sheath of deep emerald green that made me feel powerful. She booked a haircut for me, and as the stylist snipped away the long hair I had kept because Julian liked it, I felt a lightness I hadn't realized was missing. I was shedding him, piece by piece. We did more research. We found the wedding website. It was filled with beautiful, laughing photos of Julian and Serafina. In every single one, he wore a smile I recognized, the same smile he had given me 1,000 times. Looking at them, I didn't feel jealousy anymore, only a profound, chilling pity for both of us. The website detailed the timeline: a 4 p.m. ceremony at the conservatory, followed by a reception. "You can't go alone," Clara insisted. "I won't be," I said. "I'll have 5 years of my life with me." Saturday arrived, a day of impossible beauty. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue, and a gentle breeze rustled the turning leaves of Silverwood's oak trees. It was a perfect day for a wedding. I spent the morning in Clara's sun-drenched studio, not talking, just sitting with the quiet hum of my own thoughts. The grief was still there, a heavy stone in my chest, but it was surrounded now by a strange, calm clarity. I was no longer a victim of his story. I was about to become the author of my own. I arrived at the Silverwood Conservatory and Botanical Gardens at 3:30. I had purchased a ticket for the gardens online, a civilian blending in with the tourists. The grand glass structure rose from the manicured lawns like a crystal palace, sunlight glinting off its thousands of panes. Inside, the air was warm and humid, thick with the scent of orchids and damp earth. The ceremony was being held in the main atrium, a vast space with a soaring glass ceiling and a forest of tropical plants. White chairs were arranged in neat rows on either side of an aisle strewn with white rose petals. A string quartet played softly in a corner. Guests mingled, their pastel dresses and smart suits a stark contrast to the wild greenery. They were his people, I realized. The partners from his firm, the university colleagues, the friends he'd always described in vague terms, but never introduced me to. I found a spot behind a large fan palm, my heart a frantic drum against my ribs. I saw his parents, whom I'd only ever seen in pictures. His mother, a woman of severe elegance, looked tense. His father was jovial, shaking hands and laughing loudly. And then I saw him. Julian. He stood near the altar, resplendent in a custom-tailored black suit. He looked handsome, confident, and completely at ease. He was minutes away from finalizing his masterpiece of deceit. The music shifted, and the guests took their seats. The processional began. Bridesmaids in pale gold drifted down the aisle, followed by a flower girl, who looked impossibly cherubic. And then, at the far end of the atrium, Serafina appeared, clinging to the arm of her father. She was even more beautiful than her photos. Her dress was a cloud of white lace, her dark hair swept up in an elegant chignon. But it was her face that struck me. She looked radiant, her smile filled with a pure, unadulterated joy that felt like a punch to my stomach. This was her perfect day, the happiest day of her life, and I was about to burn it to the ground. For a fleeting, sickening moment, I wanted to turn and run. But then I thought of the promise ring on my dresser, the 5 years of dinners I had cooked, the quiet, steady erosion of my own dreams to make space for his. I thought of his easy, practiced lies. My resolve hardened. This wasn't just my truth, it was hers, too. She began her walk down the aisle. The quartet swelled. The guests watched, their faces soft with adoration. Julian turned, and the smile he gave his bride was one of pure, theatrical love. As she reached the halfway point, I stepped out from behind the palm tree. I didn't shout. My voice, when it came, was quiet, but it carried in the hushed, expectant air of the atrium. Julian. The name dropped into the silence like a stone in a still pond. The music faltered and then stopped. Heads turned. A ripple of confusion spread through the guests. Julian's head whipped around, his eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on me. His smile vanished. His face, for a split second, was a mask of pure, unadulterated panic. He looked at me as if I were a ghost, an impossibility. Serafina stopped, her joyful expression crumbling into confusion as she followed his gaze. I began to walk forward, my steps slow and deliberate down the side aisle. I was aware of hundreds of eyes on me, of the whispers erupting like brush fires. I kept my gaze locked on Julian. "I'm sorry to interrupt," I said, my voice shaking only slightly. "But I think there's been a misunderstanding." "Who is this?" Serafina's father, a distinguished man with silver hair, boomed, his voice echoing in the glass house. "Security." But I kept walking until I was standing at the edge of the guest seating, parallel to where Serafina stood frozen in the aisle. "My name is Aurelia Thorne," I said, turning my attention from Julian to the beautiful, bewildered bride. "And for the last 5 years, I have been living with your fiancé. We share a home. I sleep in his bed. 2 days ago, he kissed me goodbye before leaving on a business trip. A collective gasp swept through the atrium. Serafina's bouquet of white peonies trembled in her hand. Her face had gone chalk white. She stared at me, then at Julian, her eyes wide with dawning horror. "This is ridiculous," Julian sputtered, finding his voice. It was higher than usual, strained. She's a delusional ex-girlfriend. She's obsessed. I haven't seen her in years." "Years?" I asked, a bitter laugh escaping my lips. "That's funny. Because this is the key to our apartment." I pulled the key from my small clutch, the key I had pretended to drop in the mailbox, and held it up. "The one on Bishop Street. Apartment 14B. The one where I made you dinner on Tuesday night." I looked at Serafina. "Ask him what he had for dinner on Tuesday." Julian's face was ashen. He opened his mouth, but no sound came out. "It was roasted chicken with lemon and thyme," I continued, my voice gaining strength. "His favorite. Ask him about the promise ring he gave me, the one he said was more meaningful than any piece of paper. Ask him, Serafina." All eyes turned to Julian, waiting. He stood trapped at the altar, his perfect world shattering around him pane by pane. Serafina looked at him, her beautiful face a canvas of betrayal and pain. A single tear traced a path through her perfect makeup. "Julian," she whispered, the word a fragile plea. "Is this true?" And then, the most unexpected thing happened. Julian's mother, the severe, elegant woman in the front row, stood up. She turned not to me, but to Serafina, and her voice, though quiet, was sharp as a shard of glass. "Yes, my dear," she said with a heavy sigh. "I am afraid it is. My son is a gifted liar. It is a trait he inherited from his father." She shot a venomous look at her husband, who shrank in his seat. She then looked at Julian, her expression one of profound disappointment. "I have suspected your duplicity for months, Julian. The evasions, the whispered phone calls. I had hoped, for this young woman's sake, that I was wrong. Clearly, I was not." The atrium was in chaos. Guests were standing, whispering furiously. Serafina's father was trying to lead her away, but she shook him off, her gaze still fixed on the man she was supposed to marry. "5 years?" she asked me, her voice trembling but clear. I nodded, my own eyes filling with tears, not of self-pity, but of a strange, heartbreaking solidarity with this woman I had just destroyed. 5 years. She turned back to Julian. She walked the final few steps to the altar, her movements stiff, her grace gone. She looked up at the man who had lied to her, to me, to everyone. She didn't scream or cry. She simply reached up and, with a quiet deliberation, removed the gossamer veil from her hair. She let it fall to the floor. "It's over, Julian," she said, her voice barely audible but utterly final. Then she turned, and without another look at him, at me, or at the wreckage of her wedding day, she walked back down the aisle, her head held high, her father rushing to her side. The guests began to leave, a hurried, shocked exodus. Julian remained at the altar, a statue in a black suit, as his mother continued to stare at him with cold, unforgiving eyes. I stood my ground for a moment longer, watching the beautiful scene of his wedding dissolve into chaos and ruin. I had done it. I had spoken my truth. And in the ringing silence that followed, I felt not triumph, but a vast, empty quiet. I turned and walked out of the Crystal Palace, leaving the wreckage of Julian Croft's life behind me. 6 months later, the city of Silverwood was awakening to a crisp, hopeful spring. The scent of damp earth and blooming hyacinths drifted through the open window of my new studio. It was a small space, but it was all mine. It had high ceilings, a wall of windows that faced the morning sun, and floors that were already, happily, splattered with paint. After the non-wedding, I had not so much rebuilt my life as built it for the first time. The story of what happened at the conservatory became a brief, salacious piece of city gossip, but I refused to participate. I didn't want to be known as the woman who crashed the wedding. I wanted to be known for my work. And for the first time, I poured all of myself into it. The grief and anger, the confusion and the eventual, quiet empowerment all flowed from my heart onto the paper. My whimsical cities became more complex, their architecture telling stories of hidden rooms and secret lives. My forgotten forests grew darker, but also more filled with a resilient, stubborn light. Clara had pushed me to submit my new portfolio to the prestigious Silverwood Arts Grant, something I'd always been too intimidated to even consider. To my astonishment, I won. The grant gave me enough funding to rent the studio and live modestly for a year dedicated solely to my art. The small, quiet world I had once inhabited as Julian's partner had been a cage. This new small, quiet world of my studio was a universe of my own making. I never heard from Julian again. I learned through the grapevine that his firm had let him go in the ensuing scandal. His mother, a woman of formidable principle, had apparently made his professional life as untenable as his personal one. He had sold the loft and left Silverwood. He had vanished, a ghost finally exorcised. I did hear from Serafina. She sent me a letter 2 months after the wedding. It was written on simple, elegant stationery. She didn't apologize or thank me, not directly. Instead, she wrote about truth. She wrote that the truth, no matter how painful, is always a gift. She was taking the bar exam in another state, and was planning to work in environmental law. She ended the letter with a simple sentence that I read over and over again: "I hope you are finding your own light again." One sunny afternoon in April, as I was stretching a large piece of watercolor paper, the bell on my studio door chimed. An older woman with silver hair and a familiar, severe elegance stood in the doorway. It was Julian's mother. My heart seized for a moment. She looked around the studio, at the sketches pinned to the walls, at the jars of brushes and tubes of paint. "So this is your world," she said. Her voice was softer than I remembered. "It is," I said, my own voice cautious. "It's lovely," she said simply. "He never mentioned you were an artist." She paused, her gaze finding mine. "I came to apologize, Miss Thorne. Not for my son's actions. She is a grown man, who must answer for those himself, but for my own blindness. I knew something was wrong, and I chose not to see it. That is a regret I will carry." I didn't know what to say. I simply nodded. "I am selling my home," she continued. "Leaving Silverwood. Too many ghosts here. Before I left, I wanted to give you this." She handed me a small, flat box. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was the unconventional promise ring Julian had given me, the one with the midnight blue sapphire. I had left it on the dresser in the loft. "I found it when I was cleaning out his things," she explained. "The story he told you about finding it in an antique shop in Europe. That was a lie, too. It was my mother's. He took it from my jewelry box years ago." The final piece of his fiction crumbled into dust. Even our beginning, the one magical story I had clung to, had been a theft. "I can't take this," I said, trying to hand it back. "Please," she insisted. "Sell it. Use the money for your art. Consider it a small, inadequate reparation. Let something true and beautiful come from all the lies." She did not stay long. When she left, I stood holding the ring, this object that had symbolized a false promise. It was beautiful, but it was haunted. The next day, I took it to a reputable jeweler who confirmed its value. It was worth a considerable amount. Enough to secure my studio for another 2 years. Enough to buy a better printing press. Enough to give me a foundation, built not on a lie, but on its dismantling. I sold the ring. And with a portion of the money, I bought myself a small, delicate silver locket. It was plain on the outside, but I knew what it held. It didn't hold a picture of a lover. It held a tiny, folded piece of paper, on which I had written a single word: truth. My life now is quiet, but it is not small. It is filled with the scent of turpentine and paper, the friendship of Clara, the tentative excitement of a new project. Some days are still hard. The ghost of those 5 lost years sometimes whispers in the corners of my mind. But the whispers are fainter now, drowned out by the steady, satisfying scratch of my pen on paper. I don't know if my story is one of revenge. It feels more like a story of reclamation. I did not destroy Julian's life to punish him. I did it to reclaim my own, to insist that my story, my time, and my love were real and that they mattered. I set a fire not to burn him down, but to find my way out of the dark. And in the soft, golden light of my studio, surrounded by the worlds I create, I am finally, truly, beginning to see.